Greg and Walter, it is awesome to get to talk to you guys today. How are y'all doing?
Great. Thank you.
Doing good. Look forward to being here with you today, Mike.
I was completely moved by the documentary, and I was born in Texas in 1991. So I really don't remember a whole lot as a kid. For me, watching this documentary was learning all the details in full from beginning to end, and it was really powerful to me. So, Greg, I'll start with you. Why do you think it's so important right now, about 30 years after it, for people to watch this documentary and learn about it?
I'm going to throw to Walt because I've been stealing his answer to that question for the last week. So Walt was there when it happened. He was an FBI agent in Oklahoma City, and he did some extraordinary and heroic things that day. And Walt, and yeah, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Greg. I think just the timing of this documentary is important, and it's an important because of the messages that the documentary conveys. It's a powerful, graphic reminder of the consequence of hate. And when you think about those that are consumed by hate, they lose trust in everything. They have no trust in anything or anybody. And when you have no trust, the enemy is around every corner. So we have to be very mindful of that and paying attention to the messages of this documentary, that the consequence of hate, the importance of having trust, right? But the more important message is the power of coming together. And Mike, that you mentioned having previewed the documentary, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I think that message was loud and clear throughout the documentary. I think Greg and his team did an amazing job conveying that all-important message.
I think that is something I took away from watching it is sometimes I struggle with anything that is true crime or something focused on when lives are lost because you don't know how it's going to come across because I think I struggle because I find it hard to view that as entertainment. And it's hard for me to say that this documentary was entertaining, but it's so powerful in a way that it's not the subject matter that I'm entertained by. It's the fact that there was so much humanity that happened that day and so much that I saw how people reacted to it that was really inspiring for me to see.
Well, that makes me happy to hear. I think it's certainly a dramatic story, and there are thousands of ways you can tell the story because unfortunately so many people were impacted by it. So our job was to find, excuse me, just, a handful of people who were hopefully involved in the kind of the moments that were most intense over the next 72 hours. And we were really fortunate to do that. We found several people who were right in the heart of what was happening all through that next 3 days. Walt was one of those guys, and what's amazing to me about a lot of the people we met and talked to in this thing is, you could understand most people just running away from a building that's just blown up in the middle of your city in the heartland of America, But there's so many people in Oklahoma City that day who did exactly the opposite. They turned around and they ran right to the building. There was a nurse, Rebecca Anderson, 37-year-old woman who ran into the building to try to help people, and she actually wound up dying because it was so dangerous in there. Something fell and hit her. The whole building was just in shambles. Nobody knew if it was going to fall over. As Walt says in the documentary, he doesn't know if he's going to see his kids again when he goes into that building to try to help people. All these people kind of discovered this hero inside them that they may not have known was there unless they'd faced something like this. And I found it really inspiring to hear all of those stories.
Walter, can you talk about that? Because in the documentary, you say that you saw it on TV, you saw the smoke, and then immediately went into action. Can you take us back to that day of you watching it first on TV before you went there?
Mike, I'm sure that you recognize that folks like myself that were there that day that have been impacted by this, I've thought about it because when things like this, when we are there, I was at the Branch Davidian standoff at Waco, Texas, the day that the compound burnt down. I was there surrounded by the smell of burnt flesh, seeing skeletal remains that were just hours before were human beings, and now So those things are all put away, and they're put away in a box, and you try to put them back here so you can continue to function, you can continue to work, you can continue to do your job. So being interviewed for the documentary, that box had to be taken out and every detail had to be talked about. So it was pretty tough. And even sitting here today with you, I have to tell you, and it's kind of a tough thing to say. I'm on the verge of tears even talking about it right now, and having just previewed the documentary and seeing stuff that that day, when we're looking back at that footage from that day that Greg and his team pulled together and brought there to take us back to that day, I was right there. And some of the things that I saw in that footage, my mind focused down and blocked out so that I was able to continue to do what I had to do. And that was to go in the building looking for survivors. But that morning I was 15 miles away, and I felt and heard the blast. I went in immediately into the house, and you're much too young to remember these days, but when we had sonic booms, and they were pretty frequent and prevalent, I thought maybe it was a sonic boom. So I asked my wife, I said, "Did you hear that?" She said, "I did. I felt it and heard it." Turned on TV, saw the plume of smoke, got my car and headed downtown. But it's only dawned on me just within the past couple of days that when I left the house that morning, my entire life was going to change that day. And when you try to quantify what that really means, I continue to function, I continue to live, I continue to be a husband, a father, and so on, and do my job at the FBI. But there was change, and I thought about that when I went back home at 4 o'clock in the morning. That next morning, I realized that my life had been changed, just like all the rest of the people that were there that day. Every person that was there, every person that was impacted by this, and now even the people that will see this documentary, it will change them in some way.
I really appreciate you being so vulnerable there. I can hear it in your voice. I can see it in your face. And I think that was really what I learned about your story by watching this documentary, was the bravery you had that day. And I can only imagine how that is looking back, even just when you have memories of it, but having to see the actual footage from that day, I imagine that's super powerful. So I really appreciate you sharing that with me.
It's interesting because it's not just bravery back then, but it's also the bravery that all the people that we talked to in the documentary had to come and sit down with us. Like Walt just described, you got to go back into that moment. You got to open it up and, re-experience it. And some of the people that we talked to, like Dr. Carl Spengler, who was an emergency room resident who ran right to the building right after it happened, and Renee Moore, who lost her 6-month-old baby in the building, they never really talked much about it to anybody in the media, and so it was really a gift for them to like sit down with us and go back to those moments and share that with us. And yeah, it's incredible to watch people do that.
Greg, how do you manage that as a filmmaker of wanting to do this story justice, but also being respectful to everybody involved? Because like you said, some people just don't want to speak about these things or go back and remember some of this stuff.
And we definitely talked to folks in the build up to shooting who had amazing stories to tell, but didn't want to go on camera and do that. And I completely get that. We totally respect that. And even when people sat down with us, my job is to, and especially in a thing like this, is to just help them tell their story the way they want to, and other than that, I'm not pushing. I'm not trying to get them to tell me something in a more dramatic way. I'm not trying to get them to share something that they don't want to share. I think it's just important to let people tell you their story.
Walter, I'm curious, at what age did you decide that you wanted to get into law enforcement? At what age did you know that you wanted to eventually be in the FBI?
Well, I'm American Indian. I'm Blackfeet in Wichita. So we don't have an Indian country. We don't have a lot of role models that are FBI agents. So we don't have Uncle Ben, who's an FBI agent, Aunt Susie, who's an FBI agent, somebody in our community who is. So that thought had never even really entered my mind. My mother's father was in law enforcement. My dad was in law enforcement for a period of time. And I was a school teacher on the Blackfeet reservation, teaching high school shop. and I went to a conference, and there were two native FBI agents there, and they said, "Hey, have you ever thought about this?" Well, no, I hadn't. Well, you should, and I did. And it's kind of a long, twisted story, but I'm at the FBI Academy, and I have a total and complete lack of confidence because I'm a high school shop teacher, Native American. The rest of my class are attorneys, and one guy is a rocket scientist, and on and on. And I felt so small in that classroom. But once I got through the FBI Academy and I was at my first office, I realized that it was the job that I was meant for, and it was a job that I was made for. I think when Greg mentioned that the bravery and such, well, it's not. I guess there is a certain amount of that's in there, but it's about doing your job. You know what your job is to do. You go and you do your job, and you don't think about it being an act of bravery or anything else. You just go do what you're supposed to do. And I feel like that FBI job was what I was supposed to do. And one thing that I will say, and I've mentioned this to Mike, having gone through these interviews now, 30 years later, I'm in my 70s. So you start looking and reflecting on things a bit differently. But one of the things, and I think I'm probably absolutely not alone in this, and Mike, you mentioned it on the very front end when you talked about the kind of the dichotomy here of entertainment and information. That it's and so I came to the realization that there is an inner conflict, and there has been for 30 years since the bombing, and that conflict comes with the fact that you are not able to tell yourself that you did good. It's hard to pat yourself on the back and say, I'm proud of the person I was that day, because of exactly what you mentioned. The tragedy that's involved in that, the things that we all saw that day, the things that we all had to do that day. And to be able to say, good job, it just hasn't been able to come. So, and I'll thank Greg and the rest of the team, the way they did work us through the interviews, how we were allowed space and place in those interviews, and then subsequent to the interviews, that realization finally came to me, and that's something that I'm going to work on, as silly as it sounds, but to be able to just say to myself, you did good.
Walter, it sounds like it's hard for you to take credit for some of your efforts. And as you see me standing or sitting in this studio right now, you might see I'm a big superhero fan. And the greatest superheroes aren't ones who do it because they have to do it or because they think like I need to be a superhero because it's for me. It's the great superheroes do it because the people who need them. And that is what I hear from you. Like you have something inside of you that wants to help other people, and you're doing it not because you want to do it to be praised or renowned. You do it because I feel like there's something inside of you that I know this is the good thing that I need to do, and I need to help people. So just know that like just by talking to you, watching you in this documentary, like I can feel that. And I have just met you and been talking to you, and I feel like super proud for you.
Right on.
Well, I'll also say that, and Greg just alluded it to a bit ago, my story is but one of 1,000 stories. Yeah. My story is but one of 1,000 stories. And those are the people that I know that were in the building, that rushed to the building, people that I know that experienced it. My wish would be that their story, all of their stories could be told, because there was no one hero that day. There was everybody, and that's what I said earlier, the power of coming together. Everybody came together, and everybody had a contribution, and those stories are just incredible, and they're amazing. And the stories that Greg and his team were able to tell are but just a few of those. But I'm hoping that people, when they see the documentary, that they recognize how many other stories are there.
Greg, how did you decide the format how you wanted this story to be told? Because it's pretty much minute by minute, day by day. How did you know that was the best way to tell this story?
Well, Netflix came to us and said, we want to do this story as a feature, like a one-off documentary. So now we know we don't have the real estate of like 4 episodes. We got 90 minutes, and we're going to have to hit the high points. And you're creating an impressionistic painting at that point. There's no way to tell this story completely. So now we just have to find the people and the moments that, after 90 minutes, give people an idea of what happened, as clearly as possible. So that's what we started to look for. And I wanted to start right out of the gate the way it started. This day started for everybody except the guy that did it. So, the show starts inside the building with some footage that was shot long before that day, but it's a very good indicator of what was going on in that building. And then the bomb explodes. And that's when this thing hit all the people in Oklahoma City. And we don't really bring McVeigh's voice into the show until someone in our story actually comes in contact with him. We had a deal with a reporter from the Buffalo Times who had recorded him for 60 hours in prison to write a book. So we had all this amazing archival audio of McVeigh, but we didn't want to overdo it, So once he's caught by Charlie Hanger, that's when we bring that voice in. And otherwise, we're just sticking with people like Walt and Amy Downs, who's in the movie, who's trapped in the building, people who are experiencing this thing viscerally in the moment.
I thought you handled that really well of not glorifying him in any way, but using his voice just throughout to what was most chilling to me, how he had no remorse about anything. And I'd never heard his voice. And I think having that there was important. But again, like we've been talking about how we struggle with finding things like this, quote unquote, entertaining. I felt like it was important to include that to tell the full story.
And I think so too. We didn't want to give him a platform from the grave kind of thing, but it's only a slight piece of, that material. So you just kind of get a tiny sense for who he was. But I think what we have in there is very indicative of who this cat was. He was a very sad, empty human.
There were a lot of things I learned about his capture by watching this documentary, that when he was captured, that they didn't know that it had any connection to it. And it was all because of the license plate that he was driving around. He didn't have a license plate. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, Walt can probably speak to that even better than I can, but Charlie Hanger has told that story many times, and I think he does a good job for us, just that he wanted to go downtown like everybody else, in law enforcement, in the 500-mile radius. And he was told, no, stick in your area. You're an Oklahoma State trooper, and do your thing out there. And fortunately, he did. And then he came up on McVeigh's car without a license plate, pulled him over, started talking to him. And when he asked for McVeigh's driver's license and McVeigh reached for his pocket, he had a windbreaker on, pulled tight across his chest. And that's when Hanger saw that he had a holster. And there had just been, just a couple weeks earlier, a shooting of a state trooper in Oklahoma. So he was on high alert. That's why he reached out, grabbed the gun. And from there, McVeigh was in trouble. Nobody knew that he'd done the bombing, but he was driving without a license plate on his car, and he now had an unregistered gun. So he was going to go in and sit in jail for at least 24 hours at that point.
One thing I'll say about the Trooper Hanger pulling him over that day is one of the things that I learned in working in the FBI, working with a lot of law enforcement agencies and police officers. I call it cop eyes. That they develop cop eyes, or they have cop eyes, and it's based on instinct and intuition. They see things that we don't always see, and sometimes they see things that they don't recognize overtly, but it's their instinct and intuition. And I think that day wasn't just happenstance that Trooper Hanger pulled him over. I think his spidey senses and his cop eyes recognized that there was something afoot, and pulled him over.
Walter, what do you hope you are remembered for?
Good question.
Yeah, Mike, that's a damn good question. What I would probably most hope to be remembered for, and I wasn't always, and I even thought about this when I was thinking about the documentary. When I left the house that morning, my kids were still asleep. I came home, I was a different person. I didn't get a chance to tell them again that I loved them. And that's why I said that in the documentary, that when I was in there, I honest to goodness wasn't sure that I was going to come out. And I just had this desire to be able to tell my kids just one more time that I love them. So what I would like to be remembered for, I'd like to be remembered as a good dad and a good papa.
Greg, what do you hope after people watch this movie, comes out this Friday on Netflix? What do you hope they take away from it?
Same thing that Walt said right at the beginning of this, like no matter what your politics are, we live in a very divisive world right now. Everybody is screaming at each other across the aisle. Nobody is listening to each other. Nobody's compromising. And this is a great example of what happens if that continues. This guy had decided, Timothy McVeigh had decided that the people who didn't agree with him, that he didn't like, were no longer shouldn't be living, that there was value to have just killing people indiscriminately. And that's the kind of thing that happens when people stop looking at each other and considering their humanity. So I really hope that people think about that being something that we shouldn't do going forward.
I think that is something I took away from watching it was even in the darkest times, you see people coming together. At times, it feels a little bit sad that you have to go through something like this, or you have to go through something like what happened in Waco for people to really come together. But I think it was seeing all the people helping, all the people who just didn't care about anything else of just trying to save and rescue people. So I love the documentary. I hope everybody sits down to watch it and really takes all those messages in. I hope everybody learns from all the stories. And I really appreciate the time getting to talk to you guys.
Thank you very much, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Well, Mike, yeah, and I too appreciate having the opportunity to visit with you and your viewers.
Thank y'all so much.